Hello, everyone. Excited to be part of this global project. I'm Tamar Ginzurashvili, representing Georgia nonprofit organization Media Development Foundation. We are working on a number of activities, including research of hate speech, anti-Western propaganda. We are running fact-checking platform, which is part of International Fact-Checking Network, and we run media literacy programs to equip the citizens of Georgia, and not only them, with essential tools how to filter harmful information. Since fact-checking is not always convincing, our goal is to help public to consume media content wisely and discover truths on their own. And I think Arabella will add some activities we're doing next. Thank you.
So thank you, Tamara. Hello, everyone. I am Arabella. I'm also from MDF. I'm working as media programs manager at MDF, and I'm also part of our fact-checking platform, Myth Detector. As for our media literacy programs, we since 2017 together with the W Academy, and what's new this year, this program became regional and we have participants from Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Ukraine. So in this program we are training and teaching youngsters to filter information, how to identify false information, fact check visuals, and after this they are interning at our fact checking platform Myth Detector and working on articles. And until today, I believe they investigated more than 500 articles, just our students, so which is quite nice number, I would say. And except of this program, we also have as educational resources, we also created some online games and about media literacy, and we have all these games available on our website MilLabG, and those games are available in Georgian, English, and some of them are also available in Armenian and in Azerbaijani language. And because of we also have ethnic minorities in Georgia from Armenia and Azerbaijan. Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you very much both. Next, next I'd like to introduce Drabanti Ghosh and Mayur Diakar from Fact Crescendo to present on their organization very briefly.
Hello everyone. So me and my colleague Mayur are from Fact Crescendo. We basically run a fact-checking program, and apart from this, we are running a media literacy program in India and in 6 other different South Asian countries. So basically, we started this journey in 2022, where we started training young students at a very young stage in their schools about media literacy program. And soon our program, it evolved into a much larger program where we started teaching communities, when we started reaching out to journalists, community leaders like you all have joined us. And I'm hoping that this project is going to be really exciting for everybody who has joined here, and we are going to continue collaborating in such projects in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Drabanti. And then finally, our final regional partner I'd like to introduce is Fatabiano, and I'd like to introduce Muath Alfa here, the CEO of Fatabiano.
Hi, hello everyone. This is Muad from Fatabayanu. Fatabayanu is an independent fact-checking platform that covering 19 countries across the Middle East and North Africa. In Fatabayanu, we have around now 10 years experience in the MENA region. Currently, we are publishing around 1,000 fact-check per year. We start by publishing 50 fact-check per year, then the next year become 100 fact-check per year, and the number was increasing year by year. Now we are publishing around 1,000 fact-check every year. currently in Fatabayanu also we are developing the first AI fact-checking product that support Arabic language, which is something very necessarily and have a huge value in MENA region to have such AI products support Arabic language. Also in Fatabayanu, we cooperate with major organizations to promote media literacy as ICFJ and our colleague partners to support and to promote media information literacy in local and global events and trends. We have published many awareness campaign in the last few years in many different topics in health and climate change and election and scams and a lot of awareness topic. And in this awareness media and awareness campaign, we have reached around 5 million users until now. Also, Fatabayanu, we have a branch called Fatabayanu Academy. In Fatabayanu Academy, until now we have empowered around 800 individuals with training skills and tools via our workshops. Thank you again. Happy to be with you today and looking forward to today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Great. So we're going to jump into the main presentation while you're all here. One quick thing before I turn it over to our presenter. I know there's many of you here in the application that indicated that you would like to be considered for grants and other activities coming up on in this program, on the training of trainers component of this program. We will be in touch with those of you in the next few weeks. We will not be addressing any of that here. Today's presentation is a foundational presentation on the fundamentals of disinformation and also a whole range of examples and tools and resources, and really to sort of get at the substance of disinformation and misinformation. So we're not going to be addressing the grants and other opportunities here, but we will be in touch soon. But with that being said, again, use the Q&A, but please only use it for questions that are relevant to this presentation. And having said all that, I'm now going to turn it over to our main presenter. His name is Kobe, and he is from MediaWise, and he's going to talk to you about MediaWise and get us started. Thank you all.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Paul, for that. I really appreciate it. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Hopefully you guys are all having an amazing start to your week, and hopefully everyone had an amazing weekend. With that being said, before we really dive into it, I not only wanted to thank all of you amazing people for attending this session, but also thank all of the in-country partners and as well as ICFJ for hosting and really gathering this event and facilitating this amazing work. And with that being said, let's dive right into it. So hello again, guys. My name is Kobe, and I am an international fellow for MediaWise. And what MediaWise is that it is the digital media literacy initiative out of Pointer. And the mission here at MediaWise is to teach anyone how to pretty much sort facts from fiction. And with that being said, it's essential that we inform people. It's essential that we educate. And it's also essential that we innovate on that. And again, regardless of what it may be, whatever the content may be, no matter where the content is coming from, it's important that we really uphold these beliefs so that everyone can really participate in really combating misinformation, disinformation on a global scale. So with that being said, let's move on. So MediaWise, it has been quite the journey being here, I'm not going to lie. And in 2018, it started with the goal of reaching over 1 million Gen Zers. And this is in terms of social media courses and other types of social media content that is meant to empower and really educate the youth. And then in 2019, the TFCN, or the Teen Fact Checking Network, launched. And within the year, it reached this goal by reaching out to these younger generations, which is pretty amazing. And then around 2020, we launched MediaWise with seniors and our ambassador programs, again to focus on that this content, this type of work isn't just limited to younger generations or the youth, but it's also for everyone. Everyone should be able to have the ability and have the chance to be able to sort fact from fiction online and do it for themselves. And then in 2022, we expanded internationally with launching the United States-based Spanish language program. And with that being said, we teach media literacy techniques through public and internal facing trainings, such as campus correspondence trainings to various universities and academic institutions, as well as partnerships with news organizations to sort of hone in more on this and help local newsrooms combat misinformation or disinformation for themselves. And also using peer-to-peer learning and text-based learning courses that are also self-paced, so that we can also help people when they're in their downtime or if they're on their smartphones, so that they have the ability to also learn about misinformation, disinformation, what it looks like, and then most importantly, how they can detect it and debunk it for themselves. So with that being said, that's a little bit about MediaWise. So now that we're done talking about the introduction of MediaWise, let's go over ultimately what the agenda and the goal is for today. So today we're going to talk about the basics. Before we even get into what it looks like in terms of misinformation and disinformation, we're going to get into the types of, literacies, what misinformation and disinformation is by definition. We're also going to look at the state of misinformation and media literacy. We're going to see, how the numbers stack up with all the work that we've been doing since 2018. How are things looking? Are the courses working? Is the content working? That kind of stuff. And then followed by that, obviously, we're going to have some breaks. Keep in mind, we are going to have breaks. Doing a whole 4-hour session all the way through would be rather exhausting, especially for everyone today. So we're definitely going to have some breaks, and this will be a time also to ask questions, as Paul mentioned earlier. And again, we're going to go over the various types of literacies. It's usually not just media literacy, but digital literacy, news literacy, and much, much more. And then we're also going to talk about the mechanisms of delivery. And when I say the mechanisms of delivery, we're talking about, what does misinformation, disinformation really look like in, a real live setting? What is an example of something that could be considered disinformation or misinformation? So these mechanisms we're going to be looking at, and this could be in the form of memes, screenshots, cross-posted content, and videos, your run-of-the-mill media that we consume on a daily basis. And then following that, we're also going to lead into another break, just so we can also break this up bit by bit so everyone can digest and consume and really acknowledge this content. And then following the break is when we also get into, in my opinion, the cool part of the presentation and also some of the more interesting parts, and that is the tools themselves. I also want to hone in again what Paul said earlier, all the examples that are seen here, not only just the examples of mis and disinformation, but the tools are being used are merely just one way of doing it and just for example purposes. There are thousands, if not more, tools and tips out there that could be used when it comes to debunking mis or disinformation. So with that being said, after that, since I'll be one of the bigger parts of the presentation, we're going to head into another break. And then a part that I consider something that should be very, very, serious is online safety. When it comes to debunking claims or looking at certain news articles, oftentimes in this line of work, you're not always going to be looking at information that's just based in your country. It's going to require you to have to go on websites and news organizations that might be based somewhere else. So when it comes to all of this international traffic and all of the things you're going to be clicking on, I personally think it's safe that we always have some type of safety mechanism. Now, this isn't fail-proof. I don't want anyone to think that this is going to save anything too serious, but it's another step in making sure that your information and is safe and that you're not being prone to malicious attacks, whether it's cyber capabilities or trolls or phishing attempts. So again, we're going to look at some definitions. We're going to look at what misinformation looks like. We're going to look at literacies. And of course, we're going to look at some safety. And then we're going to have a nice closing out slide, and hopefully we'll have some more questions at the end. So with that being said, guys, let's wrap right into it. So in the fight against misinformation or disinformation, I think it's important that we hone in on what are these terms before we really get into what these things look like. What does disinformation look like on social media? How can we combat it? We need to first identify it and define what that means. So with that said, let's go on and see what these definitions really mean. So, misinformation, by definition, it is when someone is sharing false or misleading information, but they're not really engaging in sharing this information for, to harm anyone or to get someone hurt in any way, shape, or form. More or less, they're misguiding people. So, I guess misinformation could be if a friend is passing on information about a book that he's never read. Maybe, someone might not get hurt from that, but you're definitely going to misguide someone because, they didn't read the book. And I guess the reason why someone might share misinformation as well is that maybe they want to be a supportive friend. There's oftentimes a lot of things that go on that we can and cannot relate to. So oftentimes the misinformation thrives, and when it happens, it's when people are just trying to fill in that gap. And unfortunately, when they're doing that, they're not really doing the concrete research that they probably should have when talking about content like this. So misinformation, they're sharing content, misleading information, but they don't really have any ill intent in mind. So with that being said, let's move on to disinformation. So disinformation is when people are sharing false or misleading information, but they have ill intent in mind. So this is when an individual knows that the content that they're looking at, or they might want to share with somebody, they know that it's misleading, they know that it can misguide someone and possibly harm someone, and they're doing that with the ill intent in mind. And the reason why someone might want to spread this type of content is easy. Sometimes people might, want to make a quick buck. We never really know what that's for, but oftentimes people engage in this content for personal beliefs, or they're just looking to, stir the pot, to say the least. So now that we've gone over misinformation and disinformation, let's move on to the next.
Toby, can I jump in real quick? Sorry. Would you mind just speaking a little more slowly? Some people are just requesting just to slow down just a little bit.
Of course, of course.
Thank you so much.
And yeah, the two terms, misinformation and disinformation. So now that we've defined misinformation and disinformation, let's take a look at the types of mis and disinformation. So of course we have the two terms, misinformation, disinformation, but these two terms also come in various types. It could be satire or parody. It could be misleading content. It could also be imposter content, fabricated content, false connection, false context, or manipulated. And now we're going to go through and see exactly what these look like, what these mean. So, satire or parody. When it comes to the types of mis and disinformation, satire, it doesn't really have the intention to cause harm, but it can definitely fool. As you see this example on the right here, we see this article that is more or less trying to make some type of point here and trying to play off of something. But when we look deeply at this article, the way it's written, the way it's articulated, it's clear that this example here is trying to make fun or poke fun at someone or something. I think that this always warrants a type of research or some type of, further researching to see what's going on with this example. But then when we further look at this example here, it is clear that it is from a news site called The Onion. And this example here of satire and parody is very common in the international community because there are a variety of news articles or news organizations out there that do, actively participate in generating satire or parody content, not really looking to harm somebody, but they are looking to definitely, fool around, get a quick joke out there and really, try and get a reaction out of people, usually playing off of something that could be, hot or breaking news. And then as we see here on the right, as I said, this is a common thing in the international community. There are a variety of, satirical website or news websites, such as The Onion, as we just saw, but then there's other ones in Jordan and Australia, Canada. There's a variety of these types of, organizations out there. Again, they're not looking to really cause harm, but they are definitely looking to misguide and, crack a joke here and there. Now that we've looked at satire and parody, the next type of mis or disinformation would be false connection. And false connection is when you have headlines or certain visuals, maybe even some captions that don't really support the content, but they're there usually to, generate some type of reaction. As we all know, when we do consume certain media, whether it's a news article or a video, or maybe even some type of trailer for a show or a movie, oftentimes they are, constructed to be more enticing, to really grab your attention. So oftentimes when you see headlines like this that contain bold terms, it's going to make someone really turn their head because, these are very bold terms here. We don't really know what this article is about. But when we see slides like this, it can really be deceiving. And false connection also has a tendency to be something called clickbait. Maybe some of you or all of you have heard of or experienced this yourself, but false connection. Oftentimes people can generate these types of headlines or captions or content in an article or video or whatever it may be, just to make it very clickbaity, to make someone want to click on it right away without hesitation, without thinking. So false connection, oftentimes these things are really constructed to be very, very, very enticing, but it turns out that these bold terms, these captions, the visuals, they don't really support the content. Now that we've looked at that example, let's move on to misleading content. So a lot of these terms you might find out do really blend together in certain instances. There's not really one term that will be, an example for all or something that will represent all of mis and disinformation, but misleading content, misleading use of information to frame really an issue. So oftentimes misleading content can be in the form of somebody taking something that does maybe have some bit of truth to it, or maybe has some type of, underlying message to it, and they will use it maybe with a new caption or with something new behind it and use it to sort of frame an issue or distort the narrative to their liking. As you can see on this example here, they're clearly making a jab at, fossil fuels, spraying chemical made from fossil fuels onto a wind turbine. So again, similar to the previous examples, anytime you really see mis or disinformation that maybe gives you a little bit of a reaction, let's say might confuse you, it could possibly make you sad or angry, or maybe make you even more like curious. You want to see what's going on. Anytime you really get some type of emotion like that, I'd say it's always important and it's warranted to do a further investigation, maybe research it a little bit more, take this image and see if you can find anything about it. And this we're going to get into deeply a little bit more later on. But here, as you could tell, these words, spraying a chemical made from fossil fuels, is the most, eye-grabbing part, because there's not much context here. It's a clear social media post, but it's not like there's any really reputable sources here that are really, describing what is going on in this image. And after doing a little bit more research, we find out that this was during a time of a storm, a winter storm that did indeed knock out power. But unfortunately, this helicopter was using a de-icing method using hot water to melt the ice off of blades. Now, of course, wind blades can be, when in terms of making them can be an issue, but the actual blade itself in the helicopter was not carrying anything that was fossil fuels or chemicals made from it, as we can clearly see here. And again, these examples are very popular out there. Oftentimes they will take older images and adjust them for modern capabilities, or they will take the image and just distort its context. So it's a pretty interesting dilemma here. It was a real image, it was a real scenario, but unfortunately it was not using any chemicals made from fossil fuels to get ice off of the wind blades. So because there was a major ice storm that did cause a lot of, commotion on the interwebs, these examples like this can really blow up. And this is the case anywhere internationally when there's either disaster or a big happy moment or a celebratory moment. Oftentimes there's a lot of, breaking news information that could really be, enticing, and it makes people think, oh, is this really going on? I mean, there's a storm, there's no way it's not true. I mean, it would knock out the power, right? But as you can tell, context is key here when it comes to debunking a lot of this information. So now that we have looked at that example here, let's look at false context. Now, false context is when there's content that is shared, but it has false contextual information. So it's when people usually are taking information or articles or videos or multimedia content, whatever it may be, and they're taking real footage of something really happening, but unfortunately they may or may not upload it and sort of distort the narrative. Maybe they cut out a few seconds in the video to make it look like somebody was saying something. Maybe they're just outright writing new words over top of it just to make it look like it's worse or maybe better than it is. There's a lot of examples out there, especially in the international community, of things that may have false context. So with that being said, let's check out what this example on the right is.
I was just thinking, anyway, I started off without you. and I sold a lot of state secrets and a lot of very important things that we shared.
So here we have a pretty normal video. Looks like it was uploaded to social media and ran rather short, nothing too long. But let's see what's really going on here. So after doing a little bit more research and figuring out when this interview was done or when this video was recorded, we're able to really go back and see exactly what the context with this video may be. So with that being said, let's check it out.
I was just thinking, anyway, I started off without you. And I sold a lot of state secrets and a lot of very important things that we shared. Now, all kidding aside, look, we're teaming up to design and develop new technology that are going to transform the lives of our people around the world. And together, we're lifting the private and public.
So as you can tell, as we mentioned, false context. It's a real video. It's a real interview for sure. And it was posted. However, when people then take clips and they may cut things seconds short, or they may distort the text of a post or piece of content, it can completely change the whole meaning of this. Now, it's also important to realize that this could also be seen as another example that we will go on to earlier, but these types of posts, false context, it's another popular way of delivering mis and disinformation, because cutting things, changing the words, skewing the narrative can have a big impact on the entire meaning of the post. So with that being said, we've defined false context. Let's move on to something called imposter content. Imposter content. In very simple term, it's when somebody is, trying to use sources or impersonate genuine sources that are, real people. And this is more of this is an historical issue as well, but this is even more of an issue today. If you guys don't know already, a lot of these social media apps that we use are all sort of going through a change. That, for example, that blue check mark, being verified, that term, it used to have a whole different meaning back then. But nowadays, a lot of other organizations are going for different ways of handling a verified account. In instance, you can now pay, so on apps such as Twitter or even Instagram and maybe even other apps, you can now pay to have that blue check mark. When for many years, that blue check mark was meant to signify something, oh, wow, this person's been working very hard, they're a trusted source or a trusted person, and here is the verified account. Now, especially today, I say that it's an issue is because anyone can do it. I could go ahead and find an image of somebody's face and then, pay for a subscription to have a verified blue check mark, which a lot of people, use that visual cue to signify, oh, this is factual, this is correct, they're reputable. When it turns out nowadays, especially, that it's not the real person. And this example here on the right is a prime example of that. The real one way, and again, we will be touching on these examples in detail and how to debunk later, but the real thing here is that when you see verified accounts, especially nowadays with the recent change, these past 2 years that has changed, it's always good to follow through and make sure you're engaging and reading upstream so that you can really see if this is the real account or not. In this example here on the right, it is not a real Twitter account. And another example, and I also want people to remember this later too, because we are going to see some of these examples later on when we start debunking these claims, but always make sure you are checking your visual cues. Make sure you're looking at, similar, visual design and similar, aesthetic when it comes to news sites. Oftentimes, a lot of, international news organizations or outlets have their own branding guidelines. They have their own colors. They might use their own fonts. They might even have specific ways of structuring a website using, basic code and using certain ways they want to really show off their websites. And here at the top here, we circled this URL because this is claiming to be a actual realistic news outlet. But last I checked, it doesn't end in a .com.co. So this is something that is definitely a red flag. And as you can tell, maybe some of the visual cues are off. The structure of the website in terms of design is very interesting. So this is definitely something that would be imposter content. So now that we've seen imposter content, defined it, and looked at some examples of it, let's check out what manipulated content looks like. So similar to a lot of the other examples previously, manipulated content is when someone is genuinely, using information that is real, did happen, similar to that other example, but they're manipulating it to deceive purposefully. This is when they are purposefully making edits themselves. Maybe they'll put on a goofy song. Maybe they'll possibly slap on a goofy sticker or something on somebody's face in the video to make it look hilarious, or maybe even possibly, come after the person's reputation and maybe make them look worse than it is. So in this case, manipulated content, let's see what this example on the right is.
On these documents, how could anyone be that irresponsible? Isn't that what this president says about mishandling classified documents?
We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.
Thanks, great.
And of course, when we run across posts like this, numbers always play its part. And usually when there is a post that may have 1 million views or hundreds of thousands of likes or retweets, whatever the metrics may be, depending on the platform, that usually becomes a clear indicator that these things are viral, that people are really sharing this along. And again, similar to the previous example, we can see here that people will purposefully distort this content and skew the narrative in order to, frame it a certain way. So in this post here, we see that someone has merely just uploaded this, but there's not really much context about when, where, what is this topic about? Why did this happen? We don't really know too much. So again, we're getting that emotion, confusion, uncertainty, something doesn't seem right. So I think it's warrant to do a little bit more research. And once we do that research, we can then find where this interview was. We can then find, what this was about. So with that being said, let's see what this is really about with the video in its entirety, or at least just that section.
Has put in processes in place to make sure that occurs. And yes, the president has confidence in Secretary Buttigieg.
And then on these documents, how could anyone be that irresponsible? Isn't that what this president says about mishandling classified documents?
The president spoke to this personally. He spoke to this personally. He believes that classified documents and information should be taken seriously. He takes them seriously, and he was surprised to learn by any records have been. I disagree. Here's what happened. Once his
Justice Department.
Well, let me explain to you the process.
And as you can tell, just with a few more seconds, nothing too long, we can see and really, absorb the context here. Whatever in that first example, that post was, the weird whistle sound after, this person was asking a question, was clearly edited and put in there to make this appear more goofy than it actually was. And just by, again, believing in the, something isn't right and understanding that something about this doesn't seem accurate, we are able to find more context about the information we see. And again, we will be going through mechanisms and tools later on how you can do this for yourselves. But now that we've looked at manipulated content, let's see what the fabricated content looks like. So fabricated content, another rather simple, type of mis and disinformation, plain and simple. This is when something is completely false and it is designed to deceive and do harm. Fabricated content, something that is just not true from the post itself, maybe even the account, maybe even the media that is posted in the account. This example here on the right shows that, especially in the age of AI generated content, such as AI images and a lot of other bizarre AI generation content, it is really something to be on watch for. There is a number of sources out there, and there are a number of examples of something that is totally fabricated. Again, whether it's the fake account, it could be the fake post itself, it's completely fabricated, 100% false, and the only goal is to deceive and do harm, whatever way and shape and form that may be. And as we can tell, this example here on the right, something that actually did not happen, and it is an AI generated image. And this has been debunked multiple times. And unfortunately, we can't really zoom in and investigate it, but it is a AI generated image. Usually with AI stuff, you can really tell with certain details, things they'll connect. Sometimes people can have weird, graphics on their bodies, especially when AI is trying to generate people. So in this case, this example here on the right, It's not a real account. Again, just because it has that blue check mark, what it meant back then years ago is no longer what it means today. It's not the real account, and it is not a real picture. 100% false and fabricated to deceive and, of course, do harm. So with that being said, let's move on to the state of information literacy. So as we could tell here in this survey that was done, we were assessing the various of generations and to see ultimately their capabilities when it came to identifying misinformation, disinformation, and what tactics they may use when trying to debunk certain claims. And here, in summary, we see that 62% of people think that they see false or misleading information every week. And these numbers can be rather jarring at times because, again, we don't want any of this work or content to be, framed as, for specific people. We have to, pay attention to the youth and make sure youth is okay. It's everybody. The majority of people these days are on their smartphones, whether it's Gen Z, millennials, ex-boomers, and even silent. It goes to show you that this type of work is not limited to one situation, one person, one country, one place. It is all. It is our international community as a whole. Misinformation, disinformation affects our international community as a whole, no matter where and when it may be. And these numbers can be rather jarring. And it's important to note that the disparity here between the generations and what they see in terms of their information consumption on a daily basis. And then here as well, we see that there is a lot of jarring stat lines here. We see that Gen Z and millennials use almost any method possible to verify information more often than Gen X. Boomers in the silent generation, or of other than Gen X and the boomers in the silent generation, Gen Z and the millennials are also more inclined than older generations to use social media if others have commented on posts being false or misleading. Which is also pretty shocking too, given that, the Gen Z, which I'm a member of, to check, the method of verification to see if that it is right or true or reputable, that we go to the source and see if it's reputable. So these numbers are very interesting here, as you can tell the different examples, checking for a warning label, and even search Wikipedia, which is a pretty interesting one for me, especially since Wikipedia has always been the source that, teachers and professors say, hey, Wikipedia, if you're using it, just make sure you have other information to back it up because Wikipedia can just be a rather interesting place sometimes. Information isn't always too accurate, and especially when we're working in misinformation and disinformation, we want to make sure that we have a lot of sources. And this is something that's also going to be shown a lot in later presentations. The software we're using, the tools, techniques, and examples, merely just one way. There's no one tool or one method to solve everything. There are a bunch of tools and methods in solving mis and disinformation. So some pretty cool data here. And then we also have more information here that 33% find it more important or find it important whether the information was shared by an influencer they follow. And again, this is playing off of the statement earlier, the verified accounts, the numbers. It doesn't always boil down to that. Just because somebody has a huge following or they're verified on a platform or they're known for being really good at this or they're just really cool or whatever it may be, does not mean that they are the experts here, that they, understand this stuff at detail. And again, when working with debunking claims that we're unsure of, especially when it can be an example that is, rather concerning, it's important that we have that context into its fullest. And then another one here, we see that Gen Z and millennials are more likely than boomers and silent generations to say they accidentally shared false or misleading information because they felt, the pressure to share it. And again, guys, we will discuss this later on in terms of terms and what this all means, but always exercise click restraint. And when I say click restraint, I mean, don't always be so inclined to press that link, pressing share, pressing the first thing you see. Take your time, sift through those resources, make sure you're really looking for what you want, and make sure you're also narrowing down what you want as well. A lot of the times we see these posts or certain events that are going on, and we really want to share, we really want to get it out there because we're trying to, again, be supportive, play a part in someone's life. Again, when misinformation thrives, and what it is when someone is sharing content that is misleading, that they didn't mean to cause harm, but they don't know too much about it. So it's always important. Just take your time when trying to find the accuracy of something. It just takes time. And here, the stat line, we can really see this play out in real time across the generations. So some pretty cool stat lines about this information for sure. So now that we've looked at this data, let's try and do a little bit of a recap here. And my mistake too, if there wasn't enough time to see the data in specifics, but hopefully this recap will be enough. So with that being said, 62%.
Can I ask you a quick question? Are those, because there's a lot of interest in that data, are those available online with Pointer or?
I will get back to you on that. I'm sure they are.
We'll follow up with participants via email about some of this information. Okay, thank you.
Of course. And again, guys, if you have any questions about like sources or information or, tools, please feel free to ask. But yeah, so recapping this, 62% of respondents think they see misinformation daily, which is a bit of a double-edged sword, rather interesting, but at the same time, a little bit of a concern. That's more than half of the people in this survey thinking that they see misinformation daily, which just, again, makes you think, what are people doing to really fact check or really use media literacy skills to analyze and, critique this content on a daily basis? That's a pretty high number, and that's across the generations. One thing that is common here is that all generations initially check information the same way. They will look at the person or the account host or the outlet or the organization, company, whatever it may be. They'll look at that first. And also, just to keep in mind too, a little mental note, we're going to go into how exactly to see what a company is just right on your run-of-the-mill Google browser. So hold that thought for later as well. And they also look for the date of the post. This is also very crucial. The date of the post is always essential when trying to debunk something that may be, not so accurate or something that's making you have an emotional reaction. Just because you are seeing an image and video posted today or yesterday or last week, it does not always mean that that is happening now in real time. And this is another point that we are going to heavily touch on later. Dates don't always mean everything. Maybe that's the date someone posted it, but that piece of content that they're posting, that doesn't necessarily mean that is happening today or again yesterday or last week. So also keep that in mind for later. And all generations lean into if conclusions are supported by sources, facts, and are logical, sorry about that. And they always seem to really see here if the conclusions are backed up, to see if these claims have any facts or if there's anything any commotion or any information out there about certain subjects, which is, can be a good thing too, but making sure you're keeping up to pace with things is also important. Just because there's one conclusion doesn't mean it's always just the end all be all. As we all know in our world, things are changing on a daily basis and new discoveries and new things are being, broken out there in the world on a daily basis. So following up with information that you may see that might have initially been concluded, maybe always check in on it over time to see how things play out. And then last but not least, all the generations indicate that they share misinformation because they thought it was true at the time. Again, guys, use that click restraint. We're in no rush. It's always important to make sure that you're not clicking on the first source because, quite frankly, the first thing in a web search is usually a sponsored ad. And hey, we're not giving people free money, and you don't want to be tracked by cookies and fun stuff like that and ads, which we will also touch on later. But again, there are a lot of commonalities between our generations, which is why I harp on the point that it is not about just the youth and, Gen Z, millennials. It is everyone from the oldest age to the youngest age. Everyone should have the opportunity to understand mis and disinformation and debunk claims for themselves. And everyone should also definitely be informed about the capabilities of mis and disinformation and ultimately its aim and why one might try to spread it. So with that being said, guys, how are we feeling? Any questions or comments?
So we've been filtering through the questions. There's a lot of really great questions. Unfortunately, we don't have a ton of time to go through questions, but I'm going to drop a few here. And before I do that, As I mentioned in the beginning, although I think a lot of people logged in a little bit late, we can't share this exact presentation, but what we're going to be doing is putting together a robust set of resources and links to a lot of the kinds of tools you'll see later, some of the resources and examples and definitions that you've already seen in the presentation. So that'll be on the ICFJ website. We'll also look into a few of the resources and see what we can send, including the statistics and the data and that research on media literacy that Kobe went over. So we will not be sending the actual presentation, but we will be condensing it into a set of links and resources, drawing on the content you're getting today. And so that's how we'll be handling that. So we do have a few questions, a bunch of questions. I can only go through a few of them. One really quickly to start off, we had a really good question from a participant from Madagascar who was really interested in youth and approaches to young people. And this person said, in Madagascar, like a lot of places, young people tend to take what adults say at face value and believe it. So sort of trusting your elders. Can you maybe, I don't know, Kobe, if you can go into a little bit briefly about any of MediaWise's work to sort of work with youth on media literacy, and given that they're often talking to adults and elders in their communities, and like what are some examples of interventions with youth around media literacy?
Awesome. I mean, I love the question. And I would have to say, in my experiences of working as a campus correspondent, where I was working with colleges, and even when working with the Teen Fact Checking Network, the big thing is finding things with the youth that are common. So finding examples of things that maybe they can relate to. And when I say that, usually when it comes to a lot of examples of mis or disinformation, these literacies, on face value, they can be rather, bold terms and not have much excitement in them. But then when you use it with something that is at their level and that they can really relate to, I feel like that's when you can begin pulling the thread and say, oh, so they're interested in this. So let's see if, like, cartoons, for example, let's see they have a favorite cartoon. Let's find some, mis or disinformation around that. Maybe there's a fake poster about a new episode of something coming out. I'd say that is really the good point when it comes to working with youth, because if you can make it interactive in which everyone's having fun with it, and it's something that everyone can relate to, you're golden. You're really having a good time there, and you're also really talking about a content that is very important. And I feel like it's also helpful too to use examples that are more, I'd say, lighthearted, something that isn't so serious and like very in depth, especially when you're engaging with youth. But yeah, I think that's a good point.
Great. And I'm sure we'll, for those interested in sort of youth, I'm sure we'll include resources on our program page that can direct you to particular programming and sort of examples of successful youth programming around disinformation. So there's a lot of interest in AI, but we're going to get to AI later in the presentation. So I'm going to hold on to any of the questions and interest in AI and how that plays into this.
Get some stuff.
There is a lot of interest. A lot of people were talking about the role of satire. Some people saying, in their country, satire is one of the biggest problems from their vantage point in terms of disinformation. But then there are also people saying, how does satire really fit into this conversation? I mean, it doesn't seem, is it disinformation? How do you sort of situate satire in this sort of spectrum?
See, satire is a little bit of a complex one, or just humor, jokes, parodies. It's very interesting when it comes to that one, because oftentimes it's finding the connection. Is someone joking, being, a clown, or are they really trying to misguide? So when I usually look at satire and parody, each country has their way of going about what is funny and what is not funny. And that is why when using, certain examples, certain, like The Onion and other news outlets, organizations that do work in, satire media and satire news, certain examples, they are playing off of, real-time things that might be hot in the moment, and then they're trying to crack a joke at it and try to make it look, frame it to be in a different lens. I think that finding that midline when someone is, let's say a comedy skit and they're, making fun of some type of leader or some type of celebrity or influencer, whatever it may be, I think that when they, are doing things like that, it needs to be heavily acknowledged that this person was doing this with the intent to, laugh and not the intent to misguide. Because if I just send you some type of skit from a show or some type of hilarious piece of information found on the internet, and I just send it to somebody in a totally different part of the world, they might have a very different reaction because that is not, how things are really, that's not really funny or really a joke, or something might not be considered satire. So I think having some type of system in place where you can really verify this content, really say this is a joke, but it's still misinformation because it can still mislead somebody and still misguide somebody. But I would say satire and parody is definitely a hard one because it's definitely up to your setting, someone's attitude, and again, their level of what's hilarious and what's not. Good question. That's actually really good.
Great. And then last one, we have a few others that I think we can address later in the session. There's a lot of questions and interest around definition in terms of malinformation and what that, as opposed to mis and disinformation. Can you just sort of clarify malinformation?
Malinformation is a very interesting term too, and I would say it's maybe even recently coined. But malinformation is when people are oftentimes taking certain types of detailed information. So when we're talking about malicious attacks, maybe even ransomware, maybe even phishing attempts in terms of using fake documents or fake emails to, pull one over or get something over on somebody, that information I would consider malinformation. And I think, malinformation plays big into, cyber capabilities, because oftentimes when people are using certain technology and using software to sort of spread this type of content, they're usually using things like emails and, numbers, and they're playing heavy with empirical data, I would say. But malinformation, yeah, it's a very interesting one because I would say it's definitely more of a recent term. I feel like I haven't really heard malinformation as much as mis and dis, but yeah, I would say that's my take on that one.
Okay, great. We're still taking down all your questions.